Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. My name is Kelly Asprooth-Jackson, and I am one of the ministers here. Today I am joined by the worship team of Linda Warren, Drew Collins, Stephen Gregorius, and Daniel Carnes, with a very special welcome to our cellist, Philip Delaquest, member here. At First Unitarian Society, we question boldly, listen humbly, grow spiritually, act courageously, and love unapologetically. If you're visiting us today, welcome. We are so glad that you are here with us. If you'd like more information about First Unitarian Society, please stop by the welcome table located in the Commons, just out through those doors and to your left. We hope you will be able to stay and join us for coffee hour immediately following the service, also in the Commons. Last week, we held our annual water communion ceremony in which we each contributed water to a common font to symbolize the way in which we share in each other's lives and stories as a congregation. The water from that ritual has been distilled and will be used for ceremonial purposes throughout the coming year. There are also vials of that water in baskets at the exits to this room. And you are all invited to take a little bit of it home with you if you would like, for a place of honor on a home altar, to add to the nurturing of plants or other growing things, or whatever other symbolic use of it feels most meaningful to you. For those connecting with us virtually today, we are wonderfully glad that you have decided to join us today as well. We hope that you will take a moment to watch the announcement slides shown briefly after today's service to learn about upcoming programs and activities. And now, I invite you to join me in a moment of silence to center ourselves and bring ourselves fully into this time as we join together once again in worship. There is too much beauty in this world to give up on it yet. And it is always too soon to surrender to cynicism. Bring your doubt, your skepticism, your downright confusion, even your bitterness. But in the midst of all these, in the center, wrap your tender fingers around that still, bright thread of hope. Feel in your heart that still, steady hunger for something more, the vision we glimpse every day in the rising sun, across the hills, the light that spreads across the face of the one we love, the look of knowing all there is to know, and still loving life, loving us just as it is, just as we are. For this hour, we come to celebrate, to praise, to give thanks, to refuse to give up, to steady ourselves, keepers of hope, brave builders of this still possible world. Come, let us worship together. And now I invite you to rise in all the ways that we do, and join me in the words of aspiration for the kindling of our chalice flame. One second, friends. All right. There we go. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a deeper joy in this life we share.
Good morning, and I invite you all to sing with me hymn number 81. It is actually hymn 83, Winds Be Still. 83.
Winds be still, storm clouds pass and silence come, peace grace this time with harmony. Fly, bird of hope, and shine, light of love, and in calm let all find tranquility.
Well, I would like to invite forward now anybody who would like to come up and join me for a story. Hello. Hi there. Good morning. It's good to see you. Hi. So I have a question before the story today, and it's a two-part question. So here's the first part of the question. The first part is, who has ever been afraid before?
Well, sometimes in the night for monsters.
Sometimes in the night for monsters. Same, yes. I feel, yes?
Well, sometimes one time when I was like 2 years old, at the airport, we were in the airport, there was a green airplane. It was
Oh.
much bigger than me.
Oh, okay. So
And then I got afraid, and my daddy picked me up.
So both when it's very dark and also a very large airplane. Okay. So there are many different things that we might be. Oh, yes.
It's my dreams.
Oh, it's just your dreams, though. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the fear goes away. So here is my second part of my. Remember, I said that there was a second part of the question. Yes, you had something to say.
So one night in my house, the power went off, and I was very
Oh, the power went out and you were very scared. Yeah, it's scary it can be scary when the power goes out, right? Because it's especially dark if it's night and the power goes out. There's also the certain more complex fear of being denied access to all of our important devices. It's also a factor. Maybe that's more of a grown-up fear. I don't know. Yes.
I was so afraid when I farted. I thought I was going to faint.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. So here's the second part of my question. Have you ever found that it was hard for you to stop being afraid? You ever struggled with that? I have. Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Me too.
So here's a little story about that, okay? And this story starts with an elephant. I have a lot of stories that start with an elephant for some reason. I don't know why. I think I just like them. But there was this elephant one time, a long time ago in India, and the elephant was all white. It's all white. So it was a very rare and unusual elephant, and the king who owned this elephant was very proud that he had a rare and valuable white elephant. And he was very pleased to have it. Yes.
Is it albino?
You know, someone asked that question yesterday, and I think that maybe that's very possible, and I also didn't look up whether or not there are albino elephants. So quite possibly, yes. Let's go with that. So there was this albino elephant. The king was very proud of, and the king was very proud of the elephant, decided, I am going to see if I can have somebody teach this elephant how to do tricks. Because if the elephant could do tricks, think of how impressive that would be, because it's already all white, because it's an albino elephant, as we have now established, and then it could do tricks. So he hired some animal handlers whose job it was to teach the elephant to do tricks. And this wasn't a very good idea, because the animal handlers were terrible to that elephant. They kept it awake all day and all night trying to train it how to do tricks. They poked it with sticks. They kept it chained up. They didn't feed it enough. It was a terrible time for the elephant. Yes?
Well, an elephant is too heavy to do tricks.
An elephant is too heavy to, well, perhaps certain kinds of tricks.
They can't jump through hoops.
They can't jump. Well, I think that's probably true. I mean, I have a hard enough time jumping through hoops, and I weigh a lot less than an elephant. Yes.
The elephant would also, if it jumped through
Yeah.
it would shake the ground.
It would shake the ground if it jumped, because it's heavy, because it's a big animal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It would probably make them fall over. So this elephant was doing a backflip.
Whoa.
Then it would go on its back and break the earth.
Yes, so an elephant doing a backflip, probably not a good idea. So there's a couple of problems with this. First of all, maybe the elephant isn't the best animal to choose to do tricks, just in general, but also in this specific case, the elephant... Yeah, a donkey would be better. Okay, well, all right. Maybe, Okay, so the point is, really the point though, is that the elephant was having a terrible time. The elephant was being treated very badly. It was painful and unpleasant what she was going through. And one day, she managed to break the chains that were holding her, and she ran off and got away, which I'm very happy about that for the elephant, because the elephant wasn't being mistreated anymore because she got away. Yes?
He had a friend?
Did she have a friend? Well, not yet. Maybe we'll find a friend later in the story. So she ran away, she got to the forest, and now there's no more people around. She doesn't have to worry about being mistreated by the handlers anymore, or at least I would say she didn't have to worry about that. But she was still very worried because she remembered how terribly badly she was treated, how upsetting it was, how hungry she was, how painful it was, and she was just constantly afraid that some more humans were going to find her and capture her and take her back to that awful place where she had been trapped. So she was just constantly worried and afraid, and even if just the wind blew, right, no other people around, no other even animals around, but just the sound of the wind blowing, she would get very upset and very worried and so afraid that she would start crashing around. And here is the thing. If a small animal gets very upset and starts, making a big commotion, there's only so much damage it can do. But an elephant, as we have established, is very, very large and very heavy and can do a lot of damage to trees and rocks and even other animals if she's not paying attention to what she's doing because she's so upset and she's so afraid. And houses, but in this case, there were no houses in the forest. But it was a terribly unpleasant thing for the rest of the things that lived in the forest, the rest of the animals that lived in the forest. Yes.
Why is the elephant doing that?
Because she's so afraid and upset and worried about having to go back to the unhappy place where she was being mistreated. So, every time the wind blew, this happened. And it was very terrible for her. It meant that she wasn't making any friends in the forest because none of the animals wanted to be around her because she was not safe to be around, pretty much. And she wasn't able to take care of herself. She wasn't able to find food because she was so busy worrying. And alternately, sometimes she was hiding, and sometimes she was having basically a tantrum, a self-preservation tantrum, but a tantrum nonetheless. So one day, in between episodes like this, a little tiny mouse, here's maybe where a friend enters the story, a little tiny mouse went to see the elephant and approached very, very gingerly, so the elephant couldn't even hear the mouse coming, even with her big, powerful ears, and said to the elephant, my friend, what are you so afraid of? The wind can blow leaves, it can shake trees, but the wind cannot hurt you. You are much, much stronger than the wind. And the elephant, it's not that everything changed for the elephant in just that moment, but the elephant did think about what the mouse had to say, because here was the very smallest animal in the forest pointing out to the very largest animal in the forest that she was very strong and very powerful and perhaps didn't have anything to fear from the wind. So the next time the wind blew, she still got afraid. She still had that feeling, but she thought about what the mouse said, and she was able to pay a little bit more attention to what was going on around her, to listen to the wind and its beautiful sound in the trees. She was able to watch the sky with the clouds moving back and forth. And over time, each time that this happened, it was a little bit less frightening, and it was a little bit easier for her to just enjoy the moment and not be so worried about what might happen in the future. And so she was able to spend more time finding food, so she wasn't hungry anymore. And she was able to make friends with some of the other animals and come to enjoy their presence and their company. And they can... I did. Yes.
It's my birthday.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
Today's my birthday.
Well, happy birthday to you as well. So, do we have a lesson we can take from this story? Does anybody have any ideas about what this lesson might be? Yes, what do you think?
Yesterday was the party. That she doesn't need to be afraid.
That she doesn't need to be afraid, yes. And I will add something to that part of what helped her realize she didn't need to be afraid was the help of other people. That at the connection with the mouse, who took the risk of approaching her, even though it was felt a little unsafe. She felt a little bit like, okay, big elephant, small mouse. That connection helped her to be less afraid. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and now we are going to sing you to your classes.
You shall go out with joy, be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. And all the trees of the field will clap their hands. The trees of the field will clap their hands. The trees of the field will clap their hands while you go out with joy.
I invite you now into a time of giving and receiving, where we give freely and generously to this offering, which sustains and strengthens our community here, and also our outreach offering recipient, whom this week is the Sierra Club Four Lakes Group, Madison's expression of one of the nation's oldest and largest and most influential grassroots environmental organizations. The Sierra Club works to protect our communities and our planet. Please give generously. There are multiple ways to share your gifts this morning. Baskets are now being passed here in the auditorium for cash or checks. Or as you'll see on the screen, you can donate directly from our website, fusmadison.org, and find the text to give information there as well. We thank you for your generosity and your faith in this life we create together. Thank you so much for the beautiful music. It is said that long ago, in the city of Damascus, in what is now Syria, there lived a certain famous and respected imam. Imam is the Muslim title for a religious teacher and scholar. This teacher was renowned for his wisdom and his goodness, and the people of the city spoke his name with reverence and threw flowers before him as he walked through the streets. The trust and respect the imam commanded was so great that one day he was invited by the caliph, the great king, to attend the royal court and offer his advice on a matter of great importance. The caliph sent his finest carriage to bring the imam to the palace with 100 servants and attendants to make sure that his journey through the city was as easy and pleasant as possible. And as he was reclining on silk cushions and eating a braised fig, the imam heard a voice in his heart ask him a question that chilled him to the bone. And have you forgotten me so soon? The imam spat out the fig, leapt from the carriage, and ran from the city. He had left behind all his possessions, gave up his lofty place and title, and became a wandering beggar. For years, he lived anonymous and marginal, determined never to let himself be distracted by luxury and comfort again, so that he should never have to face that terrible question. And then, one day, the imam happened to return to Damascus. His clothes were threadbare. His beard and hair were a knotted mass. No one recognized him, and the people who had given him praises and accolades before now treated him only with contempt and disdain. When he passed near the gates of the palace, where he was once meant to be an honored guest, the guards raised their swords to frighten him off. Filled with fear and despair, the imam turned to run the other way, and in that moment, he heard the same voice in his heart, asking again, "And have you forgotten me so soon?" Now, there are many different ways that we might think of the voice that the imam heard. But I imagine it to be the voice of his highest and best self, that which in him was devoted to truth, to justice, and to doing what was right no matter the cost. Each of us has that same potential inside of us, and each of us, unless we are a saint or a bodhisattva, have experienced some moments of forgetting it, forgetting what is hopeful and what is holy in us and in other people. Because we are too comfortable to remember the suffering of others, or because we are too sad or too frightened to remember to hope for a finer world. Finding our way back to ourselves is a permanent project, not something that we do once, but something that we have to do over and over and over again in life. For many of us, it may feel easier or more natural to reserve our efforts towards cultivating our highest and best self to times which are quieter, calmer, less complicated. The hour we lay aside once a day or a week or a month or however often we can get to it to meditate, the few moments at the beginning or the end of the day that we are able to set aside for prayer or deep introspection, the hour that we make once a week, hopefully, to be here. And I am not saying that any of that is a bad idea. Please don't hear me like that. It's a good thing to do, and I encourage you in it. But there are reasons why that may not be enough. Why waiting for the quiet parts of life in order to look within ourselves and try to make contact with what is most deeply good and virtuous in our own selves requires something more than that. The first of those reasons is that the harmonious times of life do not arrive on a consistent and a convenient schedule. And second, sometimes it is the storms of life which are the most clarifying. According to a story from the Jewish tradition, there was once a ship sailing across the wide, dark sea when it became engulfed in a terrible storm. The crew worked bravely to keep the ship afloat against the high winds and crashing waves, and eventually, the storm did pass. They made it through and found that their ship was pretty much all right. But they had been blown far, far off course. Now the trip would take several days longer than expected. This wasn't too much of a problem, except that they had only stocked so much food for the voyage, and the stores were running low. So the ship's cook, whose job it was to see that everyone aboard was fed, decided to go and talk to one of the ship's passengers. The passenger was a wealthy merchant, and the ship's hold had many crates belonging to him filled with exotic foods that he planned to sell for a tidy profit once they reached port. The cook asked if she might use some of the merchant's wares to keep the crew and the other passengers fed for the rest of the voyage. The merchant replied, "What's mine is mine. What happens to the rest of you is of no concern to me." Days passed, and the last of the ship's reserve of food was eaten. Now the cook had nothing at all to cook. So she went to see the merchant again. And this time she asked him to follow her to where his cargo was stored. Standing near his boxes of olive oil and dates, she took out a hand drill and began to drive a hole into the floor of the ship. She seemed determined to make a hole straight through to the sea. "Stop!" cried the merchant. "We'll all go down along with the ship if you do that." The cook replied, "I am only making a hole under my own little spot of this boat. What's mine is mine. What happens to the rest of you is of no concern to me. The drill went deeper and deeper into the wood until finally the merchant relented. All right, I understand. If the people on this boat go hungry, I'll be stuck at sea just as surely as everyone else. Here, let me open some boxes and find you something to make dinner with. We live in an illusion of separateness, that what happens to us affects us alone, and that what happens to everyone else is of no concern to us. The discipline of sharing our lives in spiritual community with others is meant to break that illusion, to remind us that we are all in the same boat, that what affects one of us affects all of us. We come here to practice opening the precious crates of our lives and passing around what each of us have to share. But there is an irony here, as I see it, that in the tumult and chaos of the most difficult and disordered of times, the lines between us and the world around us often get blurred. This can be very dangerous as we react to a crisis by ascribing our own fear or anger or sorrow to someone or something outside of ourselves, instead of facing and working with the feelings that rightly belong to us. We might also react to experiences of danger or upheaval by clinging tightly to whatever falls to hand, to a person or an idea or an identity, without considering how our grasping ego impacts the focus of it or renders us more vulnerable to an already risky situation. And yet, we still are not islands unto ourselves. The solution is not to pretend that there is some perfect, impermeable boundary between who we are and who everyone else is. It simply is not so. We are formed and shaped by our interactions with and connections to everyone else. We are actually in the same boat with each other. That doesn't only mean that we are all at risk of the same fate, but also that we learn and grow and come to understand ourselves with the help of others. It's a little like the story from the Hindu tradition about a great spiritual teacher who had many devoted followers. And every morning, this teacher would give a long lesson near the banks of a great river, with his greatest students listening intently in a tight huddle around him, and then the next rank of spiritual attainment beyond them, and then the next, until no space was left on the shoreline. Sometimes, the most meager adherents, who were too poor and too unlearned to be allowed into the regular audience, would gather on the opposite bank of the river and strain their ears, hoping to catch just a few drops of the holy man's wisdom. There was one woman in particular who came dutifully each morning to watch and listen from the wrong side of the river. And she craned her neck, and she strained her ears, and she did her very best to take in whatever scraps of the teacher's wisdom she could. And then, one day, in the middle of the teaching, she was so wrapped up in listening, with her eyes closed tight and her body leaning out over the water to point her ear toward the other shore, that without even realizing what she was doing, she took a step off of the bank and into the river. But she did not sink. She stood on the water for a moment, until she took another step, and then another. And eventually she did realize what she was doing, but she didn't care. Each step brought her closer to the wisdom of her teacher. Each step allowed her more opportunity to learn, and so she walked all the way across the river until she stood on the shallow water just beyond the outer ring of the least honored students on the far side. The teacher's followers took no notice, for their attention was on their master, but his attention had been drawn to the woman before she was even halfway across the river. He was awestruck at the miracle, a feat that he had never even attempted, and so he ordered his students to make way and went down to the shore to greet her. She bowed deeply and thanked him for the honor of his attention, and he asked her how she had accomplished the miracle of walking on water without sinking. "It was only by your power, O wise one," she replied. "For with each step that I took, I thought only of you, reciting your name to myself over and over again." The teacher was pleased to hear this. It satisfied his ego quite well. And he reasoned that if his lowest student could achieve such a demonstration of spiritual merit, certainly he could follow suit by the same means. So he closed his eyes and fixed his mind perfectly upon himself, reciting, "Me, me, me." He took one step onto the river and sank. At this time, Hurricane Lee, post-tropical cyclone Lee, technically, is somewhere over Nova Scotia or New Brunswick. The devastation which hurricanes are capable of is profound, and their toll on human lives can be tragic. So before invoking them as a metaphor, I should express first my sincere hope for the safety of everyone in the path of such storms this weekend or at any other time. But there is something about the shape and activity of a hurricane that seems to me relevant here. In such a storm, the power and rotation of the wind creates something that feels coherent, almost like a being unto itself, a frightful and dangerous being, blowing over and picking up all manner of objects and debris as it roars and churns. And yet, at the center, there is a quiet and a calm. The air is still in a way that it is under almost no other circumstances on earth. When we are in contact with the core of our own deep selves, when we have an awareness of what matters most to us, what values, what relationships drive us most deeply, and can act from that awareness, it is as though we are the eye of a hurricane. The storm of life rages around us. I don't mean that it doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. But there is still a point of certainty for us to rest within. In one of the more famous passages of the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Elijah had reached a deep low. He despairs of the total failure of his religious mission, and though he is literally on the run for his life, he questions the value in even continuing to live. Then, alone in a cave in the desert, Elijah hears the voice of the holy instructing him to stand on the mountain before God. And lo, God passed by. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of God, but God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire. But God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice. The voice sets Elijah back upon his trajectory, restores his purpose and hope, and gives him a way forward. And the voice does so, beginning with this question: "Why are you here, Elijah?" It is only when he hears that voice that Elijah comes out of his cave. A still, small voice seems to me a fair description of the unheard sound, the insight that comes from within. As always, whether or not you believe in God is completely irrelevant to the critical issue here. Attuning ourselves through meditation or prayer, a practice of deep listening and reflection, allows us to access reserves of purpose and hope. This is not a matter of grandiose spiritual missions and divine intent, or at least it is not only that. Most of the time, that small voice, too often pushed down and ignored, is the voice of our own empathy, our ability to understand another's experience, or at least to attempt to. Each week, we gather, bringing with us hopes and fears, sorrows and joys. We share them in this space, knowing that they are held in love. Because it's new, I want to draw your attention to the book sitting up front here near the candles. This is one more method for you to contribute your joy or sorrow to this beloved ritual each week. Before the service, if you come forward and write down what is on your heart in this book, Kelly or I will be collecting it each service before the ritual in order to share what is shared there with the rest of you. We begin now by lighting a candle of celebration and acknowledgement for Rosh Hashanah, which began on Friday night, the Jewish festival of the New Year, which marks the beginning of the days of awe. To all those here, all those in our sibling congregation, Shirei Shemayim, all those all over the world who are celebrating this annual festival at this time, we wish you L'Shana Tova Umetucha, a good and sweet new year. And we light one candle for all those joys and sorrows, hopes and fears, deeply felt, which remain in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. And now I invite you to join me in the spirit of meditation and of prayer with these words from Earl Holt. The moment of prayer is an invitation to be calm in the midst of the tumult of the world and our over-busy lives, to bring together thought and feeling, mind and spirit, and to find some center, some still point of perspective and peace. Here in this sanctuary, which has been the home of so many secret thoughts and hopes, fears and desires, may we feel free to look at ourselves with true honesty. May we be unafraid to face the decisions we have been trying to avoid, the doubts and questions it has been easier to ignore, the things we have tried to keep hidden, not only from others, but even from ourselves. May we come to discover that there are resources within ourselves and beyond us that are as hidden but as real as our secret doubts and fears. New dimensions of the spirit within and without will be revealed to us as we confront ourselves honestly and come to understand that which we are not isolated from the community of life and spirit, but that our soul's suffering connects us with the hidden suffering of others. May we come to see that in our deepest loneliness, we are not alone. And may we be emboldened by this vision to reach out to others in their need. And so finally to discover that to give is not only more blessed than to receive, but that to give to others is to receive what we most need for ourselves. Amen.
There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all we rest in this love.
And now I invite you to rise in body and or in spirit to sing together in the gray hymnal, hymn number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far of Him that hails anew.
reminding you to please take water home with you if you would like. There is a fire at the center of each of us, a fire that, if nourished, brings light and warmth into our lives. Every other person also has a fire at their center. Our actions in this world can nourish the fire of others, or, depending on our choices, our actions can dampen or even extinguish those fires. As we dampen or extinguish the fire of others, we dampen or extinguish our own. As we encourage and nourish the fires of others, we encourage and nourish our own. By encouraging and nourishing the fire at the center of each other, we bring even greater light and warmth to this world and to ourselves. This week, may you nourish and encourage the fire at the center of others, and may you be nourished and encouraged in your center. Blessed be. Go in peace, and please be at rest for the postlude.
stopped in yesterday and there was somebody else there, so I thought which is gone.
Well, and then there's a brand new person who Jan is quite sold on, and all the rest of us are not.
Oh no.
And so I said to somebody yesterday, oh, and who's taking over the ordering from Jennifer? And she told me it was that person, and I said, hello. Who thinks that's a good idea? And she said, Jan. I'm like, okay then.
Great music, as always. Hello.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're just like, okay, we can't
It's
worry
not
about
a
it
perfect
today.
place, that's for sure.
I know. And we're like,
That's for sure.
we can't worry about it today. So, but I did notice when I went in yesterday, all the shelves were overflowing in the back